15 or so text messages and emails about that topic. Actually, mostly on Wednesday and then a few more yesterday, so I'm assuming they're from some of you. About that question of whether or not we can feed humanity and why we haven't and why we don't. And that was actually the study goal where I cut off. So I thought I would get back to that topic on Monday, but the fact that students were actually kind of interested about this issue made me think that maybe I should redo my plans. So I switched plans between Friday and Monday. I'll show you the aquaculture movie on Monday, but today I want to keep going with some study goals.
Jose, the video thing is not.
You said yes for start streaming, right?
Yeah.
It says there that it's streaming. So we'll just go with it. Maybe it works. So here we go. I want to start on study goal number 3. I want to remind you of something that I said yesterday, that we definitely grow enough food to feed all the world's humans. I got a couple of students who were looking into my numbers, but I can't remember if I told you the same ones as everybody else. The thing about how we even have insulin devoted to our dogs because we have an epidemic of dog obesity in this country. The fact that 10% of our agricultural output is actually just fed to our cars. And the fact that our planet grows enough food for more than double the number of humans that we have. And I got a bunch of questions that were basically, how is that possible? You know, like how come we can't this and how come we can't that? And why does this and why does that? So here are the 4 reasons that we can't get the food to the right people. That we grow so much food, but it doesn't seem to find those humans that are starving. Number 1 reason. Oh. And by the way, I don't want to politicize the reasons that these happen. So if you like politics, you'll have an explanation for these. But I'm not going to politicize, I'll just describe the problems. Number 1, food systems are delocalized. They are now globalized. For the longest time, people kind of lived where you could have people. So localized food potential would kind of dictate localized population levels. And like, oh, you live on some little island, you can only feed so many humans, so that's going to be the kind of carrying capacity of your island. And you guys over here that live in this grassland, you can kind of grow a lot of food, so you have a lot of people living around your grasslands. And if homeboy like raises pigs, then he's gonna sell them in his local economy for money or barter, and that's gonna maybe support her machinery repair shop and his carrot farm and her hospital or her school or whatever. And so you trade for the schooling, or you trade for the doctor work, or you trade for the sewing machine repair, or you trade for the carrots. And you know, your carrots, your pigs stay local, and their carrots and sewing machines stay local. But transportation got cheaper and fossil fuels have globalized our economy, and now I can show up at Will's Pork Palace and say, yo, how much are you getting for your porks? And he says, well, I get like $5 a pig. And I'm like, okay, well, in my country, that's not a lot of money. What if I give you $100 for that pig? And he's like, cha-ching, I'm so rich. And I'm like, cha-ching, I can sell that for $400 when I get back to the US. we people in wealthy nations, we actually save money by getting food in other places. The person who grows the food in the other place, he's actually becoming relatively wealthier. But what happens to those people who live in this unlucky community? Can they compete with my $100 for a pig? This is a really unfortunate global reality that we wealthy nations are out competing the world's poor for their food supply. Because food is now a global commodity, I get to go head to head with some school teacher in some poor country who might be smarter or nicer than me, but certainly doesn't have the kind of cash flow I have. And that's not a bad move for the farmer. His president could say, wait, our farmers are making more money. We just signed a trade deal with Jose's country, and our farmers are getting rich selling their pig abroad. Remember I told you, right? What is the hungriest nation in the Western Hemisphere? Anybody remember this?
Haiti.
And the world's largest pork exporter is
Haiti.
That's why I picked pork. That's why I said some crappy little island. No offense, I love Haiti, but it's crappy in the sense that humans don't seem to do very well there. You know that the average human today, like the median human today, lives on $2.51 a day?
What?
That's correct. So from the poorest human to the median human is $2.51 or less. Half of humanity lives on $2.50 a day or less. I mean, imagine I'm off by a full order of magnitude and it's $5 because my numbers get outdated. Like, by any stretch of the imagination, I'm just barely middle class. And my daily budget is what, like maybe $500 or something? Right, like if you divide, I make my household makes a little over $100,000 a year. That's a family of 4. I got 2 working adults and 2 children. In Santa Barbara, that's like really tough to buy a house. But if you break that down into 360 days a year, that's, anybody good at math? What is that? How many is that? That's like 500, 300 a day for me, personally. My wife and me, $500 a day. So I can go to this like average school teacher in whatever that was, in Haiti maybe, and be like, good luck, lady. Like, you could take your entire day's budget and not get water and not get anything else and not pay housing and not put your kids in school and not buy flip-flops. You can take your whole daily budget, try to convince him to sell you the pig for $2.50 or $5 or whatever you got. And I show up and like, I've lost $5 like recently. I'm pretty sure my dog's food budget is at least a couple bucks a day. My dog might be better than you, average human. Like in terms of dollars dedicated, like I could go to your country and take your food to feed my dog. You know you're in a rich country when a small percentage of your income is dedicated to your diet. In the United States, between 8 and 9% of our income still makes us the best fed humans on earth, but globally most people spend more than half of their income to eat. And even if she was trying to compete with more than half of her income, I could still buy all her food. Yeah. Hey, look at this, food just shows up around here. That's like super dang food. That was not prompted. I had one more point I wanted to make and I forgot what it was. Well, yeah, I mean, think about all the foods that you spend more than $2 a day on. I mean, like, if you get like French bean, like microbrew ice cream. Those are like cows raised organically from Petaluma, where like the drizzle on the grassland makes really good fatty half and half or cream or whatever they use. And then we get like fancy sugar mixed in. And do you all know that French vanilla is like the seed pod of a slow growing arboreal orchid? Like, it's okay if you don't know that, because I didn't know that, but we're so rich that we eat the seeds of orchids. Like my coffee comes from Sumatra. I don't even know where that is, but it's far. Right? Like, my house chugs like 3 pounds of Sumatran coffee like every 2 weeks. Like, before breakfast, I have grazed the glories of the earth. And I can, because I'm rich. You know, by a global standard, we all are totally rich. And this is how those people are starving. It doesn't make sense. That farmer has no reason to feed his neighbors. He's trying to get out of poverty too. You would do the same thing. Unless there's some grown-up at the wheel to be like, well, hold on a minute. We need to structure those prices so that we don't starve our own citizens, and there's never a grown-up at the wheel. Number one reason for global starvation is the delocalization of our food supplies. The fact that now, as a global commodity, we are in competition against the world's poor, and obviously they're losing. Number two reason. Does anybody know which is the deadliest weapon of warfare? What? Nukes. You might think, but even where nukes have been used, my God. Like, we actually had the gall to whip one of those out. The single deadliest consequence of warfare is the disruption of the food and drinking water supply. Number two is conflict. People can't reach the food when nobody wants to drive across a landmine freeway, or when the farm was bombarded, or when you can't get the gasoline to drive the trucks, or when the soldiers are taking all the food from the public, or whatever. And I gotta remind you that we don't usually starve the people we're trying to fight. We usually starve the people who happen to be close to the ones that we're trying to fight. We don't usually consider that collateral damage, by the way. You all know that term, collateral damage, unintended consequences, people in the way of harm? We don't usually count those. So when people talk about like the number of people dying in a war, we don't usually count the ones whose food supply, we just say, oh, well, they were going to starve, you know, because they're in a crappy country. But we don't factor the fact that the bombs made it harder for the poor person in a crappy country to finally reach that one meal. So like if you're marginal, like if you're barely eating, we start bombing your region and then you can't get that food that was your marginal chance of staying alive. Number three. Globally, a lot of people don't get food because we're using a lot of food to make fuel, biofuels. Right now, sugarcane and corn. There's a really simple punchline that I need everybody to remember. Hand signals for you, please look up. Biofuels, all right, not fossil fuels, right? That's not ancient carbon changing our atmosphere. Like, biofuels are good because they're like plant fuels, but agricultural biofuels, nah. we can't be using our world's limited agricultural potential to run our vehicles. Biofuels, yes. Ag fuels, no. Both of the crops that we use for biofuels predominantly are hard to come by. All three, as a matter of fact, it's corn, sugarcane, and number 3 is soy. All 3 of those are high-value human foods. We can't be putting like our top-notch agricultural commodities into cars. That's stupid. Finally, reason number 4 that people don't get the right food is it's really expensive to get the food to the right people. You know, the way that we do food aid is to take the leftovers from somebody who's got a lot of food and then ship it over to the people who need it. So that just adds price to that food. Like, if you can get cheap food from Haiti, we do. And then if we want to help Haiti eat, we send them our leftover corn or wheat or whatever. And so it's usually like the lowest value stuff we've got going back to the people who probably grew it for us. It's really, really expensive to get the food to those people who really need it. They're kind of hard to reach. They're not connected to the modern economy. That's in many ways why they're starving. I don't want to politic any of those, but does anybody have a question on the 4 problems with distribution of food? Yeah?
Why don't we provide like farm aid instead of food aid, so like helping local farms?
In many ways we do. Separately, it is a real embarrassment how little aid we provide. As a wedge in our economic pie, total aid is a teeny little smidgen. And then almost all of that is strategic military aid. So like, Google these numbers, but of America's total aid output, some tremendous percentage is arms to primarily Israel and secondarily a couple of other countries. When you remove all the other military aid, which is us kind of keeping bases in places that we kind of need to, have like a finger on the pulse of the local situation, we don't really do a lot of what you might call humanitarian aid. And most of that is kind of conditional. And then when you follow the numbers, most of that is actually a sponsorship of somebody's home district. So like, I'm going to push for corn aid to Haiti because I got some farmers back home that are having trouble selling their corn. And so it's not even about, does Haiti need corn? We get to call it aid, and Haiti might be like, no, bro, we need water filters or fertilizer or something. It's a really depressing situation, how little aid we actually provide as a country, and even worse, how stupid we are about it, how inefficient or ineffective that is. What else? Nobody else wants to talk to me about these things? How many of you find this to be an interesting topic, by the way? I would encourage all of you to consider that both sides of the political spectrum have something to say about this. I'm trying really hard not to get political. But I do think that if we lose track of our humanity, we are bad people. Like, if we're okay with children starving, we don't deserve to eat. I think that's like, we gotta be okay with that. Like that has to be a thing, right? Like, left or right, like, you're just an a-hole if you're okay with children starving. Just saying. Yeah?
Are there any books on the winter reading list that cover this topic?
Oh, Blessed and Rest has a little bit of that. Ordinary People's Guide to Empire has a little bit on that. Neither of them is specifically about this. Ordinary People's Guide is about how the agricultural world, like, controls the food supply. Sorry, how the industrialized world controls the food supply of the poor. But that's just one of the many ways that we affect the world's poor, so you could probably find more thoughtful discussion elsewhere than just that.
Okay.
Yeah?
Isn't there also an issue with like short-term and long-term aid? Because short-term aid has immediate effects and long-term aid doesn't, but with short-term aid, it will end at some point inevitably.
I think that's kind of what Erickson was getting at, right? With like, should we teach a man to fish or give him a fish thing?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah.
And like people living in the countries that need the aid will like accustomed to kind of the habits, the consuming habits of Western world countries. So short-term aid ends up being.
There's a lot of debate about this. Funny that you mentioned this, especially in Europe today. The funny thing is that I'm not convinced that people wouldn't rather make their own because that's profitable.
Yeah.
So like if you believe in profiteering and capital and free markets, giving a man a fish, he still has an incentive to go get his own because he can sell them to somebody else and get rich on that. So you know, like I don't think that one necessarily negates the other. Second of all, food aid is never as good as a freestanding economy. I think that the goal should be for all economies to be buoyed. I don't want to go down the wormhole of international policy or anything, but I do think that like there's like more important, there's like priorities, right?
Yeah.
You know, everybody says, no, I'm not going to give this homeless person money because he's just going to go buy drugs and I wish he would just go buy burgers. And I'm like, if you're not going to help them, it doesn't matter what they're not buying. And you know, if you're going to help them, you should probably pick the biggest problem first. And I think that for a population of humans, food security is always the biggest problem. Always. Anybody else? Okay. Whatever your politic, I'm sure you can find out more about this. I'm not an expert on anything. Number 4, you should be getting out of the book. Number 5, I've got a little bit of vocab, but not a lot. Boys, girls, boys and girls. Grazing is when animals eat off the ground. Everybody know that? Shocking fact about grasses, if you're in charge of an athletic field or a golf course, you already knew this. A little bit of grazing increases productivity. If you mow the lawn a little bit, the lawn gets thicker. So surprisingly, if you have a grassland on this side with no animals and a grassland on this side with a few animals, this one will grow more grass. Because grazing increases productivity at a very low level. Just kind of trim the tops off, make that grass kind of stress out and struggle, work for it a little bit, and they will kind of increase their density a little bit, and they'll root a little deeper, and it actually does make grass more productive to have a little bit of grazing. This is a benefit of grazing. Of course, please look up, if this is a grass plant, trimming a little off the top might be good, but if you get to the quote-unquote crown of that grass plant, then it's like pulling out a thumbnail and damaging the quick. You don't get any more fingernail. Are you all aware of this? That if you damage the quick, you can maybe stop growing nails? Do you know this? Old people who have like crazy toenail fungus can have their toenails removed. And then they do like a little thing where they like, I don't know what they do. They like cut across and then glue the quick, and then you stop growing nails. I met an old dude. I was wearing flip-flops, and somebody's like, hey man, you shouldn't wear flip-flops on the pier, you could hurt your feet. And I was like, bro, everybody's wearing flip-flops. And I was like, ah! And I saw this old guy whose toes didn't have any nails. I was like, bro, what happened? He's like, it's the greatest thing. But I digress. Like damaging the quick of your thumbnail, if a grazer eats the crown or even the roots of grass, that will not grow back. That's called overgrazing. When grazing damages the producers. Well, everybody know what you call the place where something grazes? Yeah, it's called pasture. It's called rangeland if it's not managed, and pasture if it's managed by humans. So rangeland and pasture. Pasture is managed rangeland. Technically, pasture is where you know they're eating, and rangeland is where they walk across to reach their food. But what? Yeah.
Pasture specifically means just that it's like fenced in or like a specific area, or does that also mean that they're like growing specific foods?
Both of those imply management. I think that pasture, to be even more general, just means managed rangeland. And so if you're managing the movement of the animals on otherwise open range, you are treating it as pasture. To prevent overgrazing, ranchers do this thing, last vocab, called rotational grazing, where you break up the pasture into little blocks and you say, okay, eat over here for a few days, and when they're getting just a little bit too low on the grass, then you move them to the next block and you let them graze until it's just the sweet spot, and then you move all the cows. It takes a lot of labor and a lot of fences, but it maintains productivity. Expensive but productive. Rotational grazing. Anybody want to talk about grazers? Grazing, overgrazing? Grandson? Why do we want to avoid overgrazing? What happens if you lose your plants? Right, so please look up. Both of these are possible. Watch. If you lose your soil, that's just straight up erosion, but also, if you don't have organic material, there's nothing to bring back nutrients to the soil, so please look up. You can also get desertification. Like the quality of the soil goes down if there's no more grass growing in it. So it can leave, or it can just get crappy. Overgrazing leads to both. Hey, if you guys are interested about the management of the West, there's these this fantastic journal of science and politics of the American Southwest called High Country News, which is totally award-winning journalism that's got real science and real people, and it's the most emotionally intelligent reporting that you'll ever read. And I think they make an issue every week or two, and I've been a subscriber for a decade. And if you want, I have back issues over there, and I have a whole collection of them, and every week or two I get a new one. And it's all about issues of the West and land management. In case you're into that sort of thing, which I am, I think it's fascinating. Okay. Done with grazing? Study goal number 6. How many of you drew the soil horizons? If you didn't, make a note now that you'll need them. If you did, I'd like to add a little bit of notes at the bottom and a little bit of notes at the top of that drawing in number 6. I wait for no one. Okay. For number 6, let's start at the bottom. The quote-unquote R horizon, what is also known as bedrock. Bedrock is solid rock, and you should probably know that bedrock usually is impermeable to water, so that's where groundwater sits on top of. Groundwater is on top of bedrock. And usually, like petroleum and other fossil fuels are below bedrock. The fossil fuels would sweat out if there was cracks in the bedrock, and the water would percolate through if there was cracks in the bedrock. So bedrock is normally solid. Please look up. Sometimes your bedrock is tipped upward by mountains and colliding tectonic plates. So when your bedrock is tipped, then you know water will run down on that underground to the ocean. However, if your bedrock got kicked up over here by some mountains and over here by some separate mountains or history or who knows what other things happen, you know, the tectonic plates stretch so they get skinny. That's neat, right? So if your bedrock gets curved like this, it's like a giant bowl and it'll fill up with water down there in the cracks of the other rocks above. And that's what we call groundwater aquifer stuff. So bedrock is normally solid, water up, fossil fuels below, if they are present at all. This will come up later in the year, months from now, but I wanted to get that in today. Now I want to go to the top of your diagram, because the fractured parent material, the subsoil, the leaching zone, I don't need to talk to you about that. Here's what I do want to talk to you about. I'd like to talk about that A horizon. You should know this is an important metaphor, synonym. An important synonym. A horizon is also known as topsoil. And you gotta know that. It's so cute that he sleeps so well. I never sleep like that. Even if I'm like in my pillows with my blanket and my cozy wife, I don't sleep that well. Like a little baby. Do you have dreams? Oh. When my babies went to bed and they were little, I would tell them to dream of whales. And then in the morning, what'd you dream of? They'd be like, you know, balloons and stuff. But whenever they dreamt of whales, we would talk about it. Long story. The thing that makes topsoil topsoil is this, please look up. Actively decomposing organic material, which is known as humus, not hummus. It's one M. Humus, hummus. Decomposing organic material is humus. Garbanzo beans ground up with tahini and citrus and salt and sometimes garlic or black olives or whatever is hummus. Dip for pita bread and chips. The secret to topsoil. You realize I am so well fed. I have luxury foods of most civilizations in my fridge right now. Like in the last 10 days, I have eaten hummus, sushi, lobster, venison, steak, pork, fruits, vegetables, unbelievable dairy products, a little bit of ice cream, salted caramel gelato is my weakness, fancy bread, candy. Okay. Topsoil is topsoil because stuff is decomposing there. Otherwise, it would be sand. Please look up. Grassland has deep a horizon. Desert has no a horizon. That's why the loss of quality is the loss of topsoil. Desertification is to make your dirt desert dirt, and desert dirt is sand. So the lowest end of soil quality is sand, which is technically subsoil. It's not even soil. What makes dirt dirt is stuff dying. I tell you stories. You all, I made a big deal that my friend Forrest came to town, right? I think some of you saw his child or something during my seminar. My friend Forrest, the artist that put the art in satellite space on computers now. Okay. So my homie Forrest, P.S. someday if you ask me and we have spare time, I'll show you what he made on my Etch-a-Sketch, which we're never going to shake and we're going to screw it to the wall and never get rid of because it's beautiful. Anyway, he has a 4-year-old daughter named River. She is amazing. And she's getting really into Legos. And my boy's 8. He's kind of getting out of Legos. So one day he built something. And he was like, this is my whatever the crap it was. And then when the 4-year-old comes by, we're like, hey, so what do you want to play with? And she's like, I don't know, I'm into Legos. And I'm like, dude, go talk to my boy because he's got the Legos. And my boy's like, oh, you want to play with Legos? And she's like, yes. And he's like, what about? And she's like, yeah, I want to build that. And he's like, well, I got to take it apart first. And she's like, great. So he went like, bang. And he like gave her all the Legos and she built it again. That's my whole story. Topsoil is special because life is like assembled from Legos. We use these basic building blocks of life, and we use solar energy to put them all together. You know, carbon bonds and nitrogen bonds and all that crap. And once you've built something, those little pieces are locked up in biomass. Remember that if we didn't have decomposers, there'd be no life on Earth because all the little parts would run out. So watch. Producers pick up the loose Legos from the ground, build a castle or whatever, and now that's a protein or a carb, and that's basically on the shelf. Those nutrients are locked up in biomass, like all my Legos are in the stupid castle on my dresser. And then decomposers are the secret. They're the ones that smash those proteins and carbohydrates to make those little building blocks of life for the next round. So, watch. The secret to topsoil is that stuff is decomposing at that time. It is actively composting. Soil is a living thing. It's a food web of decomposers breaking up that little stuff, breaking up the big stuff to make the little stuff. I've got numbers that might blow your mind. This shows up in the Dirt movie 2 weeks from now. Speaking of that soil food web, if you ever want to talk about this, I find it fascinating. This much good garden soil contains, if it's good soil, 1 trillion with a T bacteria. That's a lot. Imagine all the DNA, for example. Imagine all the water consumption, for example. 1 trillion bacteria, trillion with a T. 10,000 protozoans, 10,000 nematodes, 25 kilometers worth of fungus in little microscopic fibers that add up to that much. if you separate it by mass, topsoil is in some cases 50% life and 50% stuff. It's a lot of decomposers. We're going to come back to this later. There's a reason I'm spending time on this, and you better have this in your notes. You gotta have some dead stuff on top to keep feeding that ecosystem. This is a productivity pyramid kind of upside down. The O horizon, the litter, those dead leaves and like the wood chips and stuff, that's what makes the good dirt, because that all gets fed into this food web that frees up little pieces for life to make use of. I want to skip 7 and 8 really briefly because this leads us into number 9 and 10. Let's talk about that warm-up really quick. There was like a brief moment in time when futurists, people who dreamed of the future, said we will soon reach the point where all human nutrition can be provided by 3 daily pills. It was like a display at some World Fair Expo and World Fair that was really famous. There were like flying cars, bubble dome cities, and the perfect human nutrition food pill. And I need to use that illustration for something that gets much more complicated. So please don't make this lag. Let's get it over with. What would you need to include in an idealized human food pill?
Protein.
Protein, great. What else?
Vitamins.
Vitamins, what else?
Iron.
What?
Iron.
Iron, yes. What else?
Carbs.
Carbs, what else?
Sugars.
Sugars? Anybody else? Fat? Yeah, absolutely. Good God, yes. Fat equals flavor. What else? That's it?
Good taste.
Fiber.
I suppose taste, maybe. Fiber, probably. My hunch is if you guys were in charge of feeding humanity, humanity would starve. There's a reason I do this, actually. Would we need equal volumes of those things? Correct, we would not. There's probably some like really high priorities to feed a human, right? Like the vitamins. You don't need a lot of those. You know, if you take a human body and you put it in a blender and then you put it in a spectrophotometer, we've got pretty much all of those. Every element on the periodic table is in the human body, more or less. There's a little tiny bit of uranium and gold and whatever else in you. Some of that's not even useful, but it's in there. Some of it is useful, but you don't need much, like boron. Go figure, humans need boron. Not a lot. How would we find the ingredients you didn't put in the pill? How would I know? Let's take a test case. I've got Will Stevens as my little guinea pig. And we're going to start feeding him your pill recipe. How do I find out if we missed an ingredient? This is not rhetorical. Hurry up. Really, how would I do this? How would I do this? See how he feels?
He gets the symptoms of having a loss of that.
He gets the symptoms of some problem, right? We're like, oh my God, you're looking kind of sallow, Will. Or you're changing colors, or you're curving up, or you're not able to do something that Will normally did. And then we would compare him to some other test subject that doesn't have that problem and be like, oh, that's right, we're supposed to feed him. Bunch of vocab. I'm going to skip around between 9 and 10 now. There was this famous scientist who said, at any given time, growth is limited by one thing. That's called Liebig's law. That at any given time, growth is limited by one thing. Like this Will Stevens guy, he would be healthier if we could get him probably, first of all, carbs. Because if you're going to starve to death, that's probably the one that you would most. I think that's probably number one. Then I think number two would be proteins. And they're like, oh, you're having trouble pooping. How about some fiber? And they're like, that probably comes in later. You know, you got to get the carb and the protein, but sooner or later you're going to need some fiber. And then I was like, oh, you're like not, like, let's give you some vitamins. Like, that would come down the list, right? So, there was this moment in agriculture which said, we could get more Will Stevens if we figured out what he needs now and just give him a bottle of that. If you think about it, that's a human nutrition strategy. I know people who live on nutritional supplements. You open up like the kitchen pantry and instead of food, they have bottles and bottles and bottles and bottles of iron and zinc and vitamin B, D, Z, X, whatever. You know what I'm talking about? People that are like obsessed with nutritional supplements. Does anybody know one of these folks? I definitely know someone. The person I'm thinking about, whose name I can't drop because I'm on YouTube, but you can ask me later and I'll tell you. The person I'm thinking about, I don't want to say it on YouTube, probably 40 to 50 pills a day. Not medical, just stuff that she feels she can improve on her diet. Because she's like, well, I wasn't getting enough vitamin X, so like I got to take that pill. This is a philosophy in agriculture called demand-based agriculture. Like indoor pot growers do this. They go, oh, we'll use the bottle of nutrients, and like, oh, now you need more whatever, try this other bottle of nutrients. And you know, indoor pot growers get pretty crazy about their recipe for nutrients because, you know, they think they've got all the right ingredients in the right ratios. Demand-based. Liebig said, at any given time, this thing would be growing more if we could just figure out what it's missing, so we'll just try to keep adding the missing ingredient all the time. They're limited by one factor, so we'll solve that problem and then identify the next one. Here's the problem with this philosophy, and we could talk about crops or humans in the exact same way, because nutrition is nutrition. Even if I could hack the code of making a perfect will, everybody's different, right? Like one of you might need more protein or more carbs or more vitamins or less of something. Right? Like if I got the right recipe for Homeboy and we're like, we have perfected Will Stevens. Here it is. As good as he's ever going to get. These pills in these ratios. Then we're like, but little Womack, we have to adjust some numbers. Likewise, crops don't grow exactly the same in different places. They're different too. So this idea that you can make a synthetic version of a perfect nutrition is probably doomed to fail. And you talk to most farmers and it's very problematic at best. Demand-based agriculture is hard to apply everywhere because every situation is unique. Just like all of you are unique little flowers. You like all the mixing metaphors? So all the hippies, we do something very, very different. Instead of trying to always figure out what is missing, we use magic. You see, all that stuff that happens in the ground, that entire food web, like, I don't even know what all that stuff. Remember I said 1 trillion bacteria? That's not like a recipe. I don't know what one of those bacteria are. So what we hippies do is, instead of focusing on the demand, we focus on the resource. We just offer more. And that's how I feed my children, by the way. I'm just like, try more, eat that. Like, here's something that we haven't had. Like on any given day, they're allowed to eat candy, just a little bit. But then like, they gotta eat a little of everything else. Resource-based nutrition. Like the healthiest diet for a human is a mixed diet. You all know that, right? Like the healthiest you could possibly be is a little of everything. That is the best human diet. Nobody writes books about that because it's so short. My secret to a perfect diet could fit on an address label. Nobody's going to buy that. A little of everything. Not too much of anything. And the same is true of soils. Hippie farmers do resource-based agriculture, where we focus on never finding the limiting factors. Some of the basics, the quote-unquote macronutrients, like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, you got to provide those. Like, I got to give every one of you protein and carbs and fiber and sugar and that stuff. Fine. So the basics, yes. But for all the other stuff, just more resource, more complexity, richer soils. Everybody walks by my compost pile, and they're like, your compost smells bad, gross, I'm too good for smell. And when kids complain to me about the smell of the compost, I tell them that they're stupid. Because it's the magic, it's all the stuff. Bye, children.